My name is Harry Chuck. I retired as the director of Donaldina Cameron House, a community service center located in San Francisco's Chinatown. Recently, I had the privilege of presenting Doreen Der-McLeod at the 2017 California Social Work Hall of Distinctions induction ceremony. Today, we are conducting an interview with Doreen on November 17th. It is 2017, and we are in San Francisco. A word about who Doreen Der-McLeod is. For nearly half a century, Doreen dedicated her life and work to the people of Chinatown in San Francisco. Coming from a family of immigrant grandparents and parents, Doreen devoted much of her time and energies in working with a new generation of social workers who cared deeply for the elderly, many of whom resided in crowded single-room occupancies in Chinatown. She was known for her versatility in addressing community issues, and these included community planning, land use, affordable housing, transportation, and alleyway improvements. And these skills prepared her for the sudden influx of immigrants into an already densely populated neighborhood. She's well known and highly respected as a team leader and as a facilitator by her peers and colleagues. Doreen retired as the executive director of Donaldina Cameron House. How did you become a social worker? And what were the influences which led you to that field?
Well, I became a social worker probably because of the influence of the social service staff at Cameron House. When I saw what they did in terms of helping people, from the simplest thing of escorting them to immigration office to counseling people with great needs, and the compassion and consistency with which they work with people, I became interested in the field of social work.
The next question is, what were social work and the political, social, and economic climate like at the time you entered the field?
I have no idea what the social work climate was at the time I entered the field. The political and social climate was probably shortly after the Civil Rights movement, and so there are a lot of changes happening in the community, especially in Chinatown, where people had to fight to get the acknowledgement that Chinatown was a poverty area of the city. And because of their involvement, Chinatown was designated as a poverty area, and many new programs started in that area, in that time period, where people who had worked in the community got together and saw what the needs were and began creating agencies to meet the needs of the Chinese community at that time. The Chinese community was also changing because of the 1965 immigration law, which allowed Chinese to immigrate to this country on parity with Southern Europeans at the tune of 20,000 people a year. Up to that point, it had been, the immigration allowance had been like 105 person per year. So that changed the community in allowing many families who had been separated for decades to reunite. And that created problems, because if husbands were separated from their wives, they did not know their wives or children after 20 years. So that was also issues to be dealt with.
How did your career develop? What was your primary area of focus?
My primary area of focus actually in going to social work was, again, an influence of working at Cameron House and doing youth work. So I went into social work with the expectation of working with adolescent youth. So my major in social work was group work, actually. But my first job out of social work school was actually working in public housing. And I did that for 6 months before changing jobs and working with the first youth delinquency agency in Chinatown called Chinatown Youth Service Center. And then I got married and left San Francisco and went to work in Southern California. And there I worked with kids with developmental disabilities with a regional center down south. When I came back to San Francisco, I returned because I had a job offer from Onlock, which was a totally different population. It went from youth to very young kids to working with the frail elderly. So I don't think I consciously had a career path. I think my career sort of evolved over the opportunities that were presented to me over time.
The question is, in what activities have you been involved?
Well, the activities that were related to social work were probably case management, and whether it's working with very young children in a child care center or working with parents in terms of helping them deal with children in a different situation than they grew up in. So it was both education, parental education, as well as working with teachers to help them understand children at a very young age and how, you know, the social issues that they were dealing with that might result in some problematic behavior at the school. In terms of other activities, I had a split job between Cameron House Social Service and the first bilingual Chinese child care center. And so while I was at Cameron House, I think I became involved in a community group called Better Parks for Recreation. And that was much more of an advocacy role in terms of working with the city to get them to provide more services and parks to Chinatown. I think when we grew up in Chinatown, there was one main park called Chinese Playground. And Portsmouth Square, which used to be, I remember it as a child of 4, a rolling grass hill. I think somewhere along the line in the 50s or 60s, they built a garage under that, and over time put a playground on top of that. But that was the only open space for about 10,000 people in 10 square blocks. And as a result, with the housing situation in Chinatown, where people didn't live in apartments really, they lived mostly in the SROs or single room occupancy hotel. They didn't have any community space like a parlor or a living room. So Portsmouth Square became a parlor or living room for many of the seniors that lived in the community. Somewhere in '69, they were going to tear down Chinese Playground and replaced it with a parking lot. And the Reverend Harry Chuck, when he heard about that, in a couple of days got a petition going and got over 1,000 signatures to stop that from happening. And as a result, a small group of us continued to advocate for open space. The small committee of 6 or 7 people was called a Committee for Better Parks and Recreation in Chinatown. And I think within the first 10 years, we were able to get funds to remodel Chinese Playground to be one of the most exciting playgrounds in San Francisco, whereby schools from all over the city were bringing groups of kids down there because it was such an exciting playground. We renovated the alleyways, we renovated, I think, all the parks in Chinatown and North Beach. We built some small mini parks behind the library and at Washington Square. And the project that probably took the longest time was trying to get a new park for Chinatown. I think when we started, I was single, did not have kids. 20 years later, I was married. My kids were probably too old to use the playground. So that was probably an volunteer advocacy activity that I participated in a long time and got to see the results of some of our advocacy.
What strategies did you use to accomplish the goals sought?
Well, in the case of Better Park and Recreation, the strategy we use as a committee, almost subconsciously, and sometimes somewhat consciously planned, was that each of us had a different style of interaction. So when we worked with Tom Malloy at Park and Rec, we knew Tom Malloy was Catholic, and we wanted to appeal to that. Sister Bev was on the committee, and she would speak. When we wanted to make him feel a little guilty, we had Stan on the committee, and he would mau and make him feel guilty that way to try to push, whether it was get to a mini park or designate a mini park for Chinatown. This was a program that had been in the city for over 10 years, and other areas of the city got mini parks, and Chinatown was never even considered. We were able to finally to get them to designate Trammell Crow, which was a small parcel in the financial district for a mini park, but that turned out to be not a great site, so we finally established a site on Hyde Street for the mini park. But that Trammell Crow fund, we were able to trade later to offset costs for other areas for open space. So I think the strategies, we were new in this game, so the strategy we were able to come upon was to use the different talents in the community to push the city or guilt the city or talk the city into seeing the importance of providing more open space for Chinatown. These were strategies in I guess community intervention, but I think strategies for working with one-to-one people is very different. I think that is a change in social work. I think when we first went into it, it sort of was that social workers would be the people who had the answers, and pretty soon in the field after you've done it, you realize you don't have the answer, and people's lives are not really in your control. It's really in their control. And our role is to walk alongside them and help them achieve their goals.
I think you've touched on this question already, but I'll ask it anyway. What did you learn from these experiences that were either useful to you later or that might guide others with similar objectives?
I think these experiences taught me that you can create change, or you can achieve a goal if a community works together and they share a common goal, and that you can be very deliberate and strategic about how you go about this. And you have to be able to live with some gains and then some losses, that everything's not going to go your way. I think we were at a time where change was possible because change was happening in the larger society. And there were funds that were created for that. We were actually fortunate in that our first funding, we were never funded as a volunteer advocacy group, but the funding for the renovation of Chinese playground actually came about because Lorna Logan, somebody went to Lorna Logan, somebody who had a Chinese servant who they were really impressed from, because all the years she worked for them, she had never stolen from them. She did her work conscientiously, and she was looking for a place to donate money to help Chinatown, and Lorna Logan had been lifted up as, I think either she got the Liberty Bell Award or something, that it came to her attention that this woman knew Chinatown and would know how to best use this 10 or 20,000 she was willing to donate. And it is with that 20,000 that was seed money for the beginnings of Chinese Playground. We also got volunteer architectural service from Ekbo Dean, and then involved the community, the children from St. Mary's and Commodore Stockton, to design or to tell us the elements they want in play. And that's how that playground got designed. So those things taught me that it takes a lot of, if you use the community and allow them to design things, things actually work out to the benefit of everybody. So this first creative playground benefited the whole city of San Francisco, actually. And then in working with people, I think the thing I learned most was that we learned from each other throughout my life as a social worker. I felt like I was always learning something new, whether it was about the resiliency of people or how when people work together, things can get done.
So were you always successful? What obstacles did you encounter, and how did you deal with lack of success?
I guess I would never define things as was it successful. I think that's in terms of working with people. But in terms of the advocacy, you have certain goals, like getting a new park for Chinatown or getting a spot designated to build a mini park. Yeah, those things did happen. And that was amazing to me, that a small group of 6 or 7 people could actually get the city to commit funds to do all the changes of the play areas in Chinatown. But once we had established that credibility, it worked a long time for that we knew when and where to advocate, when the funds were being distributed from Park and Rec, and we would be at those meetings to advocate for it, whether it was for maintenance services at Chinese Rec Center or Chinese Playground. But and those were nice because they worked successful. But it also, like the new park took 20 years. It feels like we would never be successful. Because we had to go through eminent domain to get the site. The mortuary fought us for years until they were compensated sufficiently. So I don't know if that answers that, but yeah, I'm working with people. I would not use the term successful, but in working on certain advocacy goals, yeah, you could, where you had a certain goal to meet, you could define that as such.
So what were the most satisfying experiences? What was the most difficult experience that you encountered?
Well, the most satisfying experience in terms of working with people is that they reached their goals, whether they got over hurdles or what have you. In working with Unlock Senior Health Service, I think the most satisfying experience was being able to keep seniors in the community by creating a program that provided such a bevy of service that even though they were stroke people living in single-room occupancy hotels, they could stay in the community, for most of them, to the end of their life. For others, eventually they did need to go to a nursing home, but they were still coming to Unlock to get their care, so they were still receiving services in a familiar environment. So that was satisfying to be able to provide good care for seniors at the end of, or towards the end of their life or in their most frail stage. Seeing youth develop and grow into their full potential at services at Cameron House or at Chinatown Youth Service Center. Or seeing immigrant families deal successfully with their kids, even though there were culturally differences. Being able to be a bridge to parents and kids in a bicultural situation for the for the parents and the kids. So I think that yeah, there are many times you experience satisfaction with the work you do because you realize that you've made some difference and enabled the, people to make differences in their own lives.
How have the field of social work and the political, social, and economic climate changed during the course of your career?
I think the social and political climate, the larger changes in the social and political climate certainly impacts any community that you work in. So as I noted when I started out, there is a big change in terms of the civil rights movement, helping people recognize that there is a a large body of people that were left out of the American dream, that they were not able to get services or access services either because of language or poverty or transportation or all those things combined. So the 60s and 70s were a great time if you were working in the community, because there was opportunities to make changes in the community, to provide services, and to create greater changes like providing housing or changing policies that impact people. I think what was sad for me coming back in the 80s, that climate seemed to have turned the corner. In the 70s, we got so many students, we didn't know what to do with them because everybody wanted to work in the community. The 80s, somehow, something happened where we weren't getting students. Students were interested in business and in making the dollar, and so they weren't coming back to the community to work. And I think somewhere in the 90s, that switched back. And so people again got interested in the communities. And of course, we're in a totally different political climate today. So the one thing I did remember from social work too that I learned was that the values of our society sort of determines our policy. And in the US, there's sort of a dichotomy of pulling yourself out by your bootstraps to the, of individualism, a high regard for that, to the whole cooperative movement in terms of people coming together to build a barn, that it took people collectively working together in situations. And both those are values in American society. But at different times in our history, one peaks stronger than the other, and our policies are definitely impacted by that. So whether it's social welfare policy of helping that we have a right to work for the common good, or that we should work for that government works for the common good, to government not that they're not caring of the common good, but they focus more on individualism and the ability to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and that impacts policy, which impacts our work with people.
What do you think are the issues social work should be addressing today? What should we be doing?
Well, we're in the climate where the other thing I didn't mention is that who gets blamed for economic downturns. And it's historically true. Anytime there's economic downturn, the outsider or the new immigrant gets blamed for that they're taking away jobs, even though these are jobs that many Americans have refused to do. I remember going down to New Orleans and people there saying, we can't get local people to do it. We have to get people from across the border, from Mexico, to do that mucking out, that dirty work of cleaning out stuff that has just rotted in water. So, so again, we have mixed feelings, or we develop very strong feelings when economic downturns have to blame the other, whoever the other is, but it's usually the latest immigrant group. So I think immigration is a big issue today, and social work needs to address that. And I think many social workers who work in immigrant communities do address that, working alongside legal agencies that are addressing the issues, basically because they know the problems of that immigrants have in this country in terms of adapting and adjusting, and that they work as hard as anybody else, and it just doesn't necessarily pay off for them. We knew that with our generation of the China, it took 3 generations for our family to get the first person to graduate from college. Because my dad was pulled out of school at the 9th grade because he spoke enough English that he was pulled out of school so that he could help translate in the business that grandfather and the uncles were working in. The other thing I think we need to work on today is really helping people understand what democracy is about. I think we're at a critical time in our democracy where we've almost forgotten our civics class lesson that we have three branches of government to work with each other as checks and balances, and that we are not supposed to be under a dictatorship or just the executive branch of the government. So I think that we need to just all remember our civics lesson and understand the role of government in our lives, and that we have checks and balances for a reason. We don't, democracy is not perfect, and but we need to understand that when it works well, it does work for the betterment of all people and not just a few. And I think we're moving in a direction where, unfortunately, money talks, and the lobbyists can control what is happening in terms of policies that's created by the government. Yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff. Climate change, we can just go on and on. And because of the nature of social work, I think there are a lot of people involved in all these areas, from immigration to social justice in other areas, prison reform, racism to climate.
If you had to do it over again, would you do anything differently? And what might be learned from our experiences by people entering or currently working in the social work today?
I'm not sure I would do anything differently, because I'm not a person that sort of has a goal in life and works towards that. Or some people know what they want to do from the time they're 15, 16, or 17, and they work towards that goal. I'm not sure I was one of those persons. I think I've fallen into this career, actually, and it's taken me to many different places, and places where I've grown with each successive agency that I've worked with, or the different people or colleagues that I've worked with. I think for people entering the field today, I would just like to say to them that the social work profession offers you a great opportunity to work in many different areas. You can probably tell from my rambling that I've worked everywhere from early childhood to working with the very elderly. I have chosen to work in the nonprofit world my whole career. Other people have gone into government or city government, and which also provides good opportunities for social workers. But for me, the field of social work has always been attention. It's attention. The tension of working to allow individuals to grow and to live up to their capacity, to the tension of realizing that there are larger issues that impact an individual, like where they live or what health care they can access, that can impact their lives greatly. So for me, the tension has been doing one-to-one work, or working with individuals, to also looking at the larger picture and working for change in our social structure or in our policy areas. So, and I think that tension will always be there, but certain social workers are totally comfortable in working with the one-to-one and creating those changes, and others are more into community organizing and working on change through policy and looking at the bigger picture.
Well, here's a bonus question. I don't think you've mentioned it, but one of your early experiences was back in was it West Virginia and Appalachia?
Oh.
Would you like to say something about that? Because I thought it was rather unusual for someone from Chinatown going clear across the country, for that experience. What was that all about?
That experience was right after I graduated from Berkeley. I think partially due to the free speech movement and civil rights going on in the larger U.S. Many times people have said that people in the free speech movement were just involved because they didn't want to do anything. And so going into what was called VISTA at that time, it's now called AmeriCorps, or the Domestic Peace Corps, was one, as I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, I decided that, yeah, I would put my body where my mouth was and go off and for a year and work in an area that supposedly I was supposed to bring some skills to. And of course, the same thing happens, right? I grew up in San Mateo, and I thought that was a small town compared to San Francisco. So when I listed it, the small town was 20,000. I think San Mateo was a lot bigger than that. So I ended up in a rural area. At those days, you couldn't pick. They didn't give you a list of, which they do now, and you can actually pick the area you want to go to. So they put me in a rural area, and I ended up in Kentucky, actually in Appalachia. And again, for me, that experience was helpful in helping me understand that I could survive in different situations. A situation that was not like a small village like Chinatown, where everybody knew everybody. I was so-and-so's granddaughter or so-and-so's daughter. In Appalachia, they were a very small community. The town I worked at was only 250 people. But you realize that poverty was not just in the minority community, that poverty existed in many white communities. And again, this was a community that worked hard. They worked in the coal mines, and that was not easy. You could tell it in terms of that people aged before their time because life was so hard. And because there were no jobs for the younger people, what you would see in Appalachia was every weekend you would see cars coming in from Ohio, Michigan, because the young people had to go out for jobs there. But they would know where the community is, and they would come back to Appalachia. So again, the familiarity was the importance of community, whether it's in an urban situation like Chinatown or a rural situation like Appalachia. The family connections were very strong. So that was a good learning experience for me, that poverty existed, not just in our own communities or in minority communities, but in larger communities like the white community in Appalachia, which extends from Kentucky to Pennsylvania, etc., West Virginia. So,
what'd your parents think about that? You went through college, you graduated, and now you're taking off to work in some small rural community.
I have to give it to my parents. I don't think they understood, but they let me do it. I mean, I think they could have just protested, but I guess maybe not. I had already applied and been accepted, and was I think they probably did not understand, but they were smart enough to figure out that they had raised me well enough that I needed to find my own path. I can still remember my dad, after I came back and I was working in Chinatown, my dad's, I think that's the biggest compliment he could give me, was he said, as he's sweeping out in front of the store and I'm out in front doing something, and he says, Doreen, you're okay. A little bit left, but you're okay. I think that was his way of saying, yeah, I may not agree with the choices you have picked, but if it works for you.
Do you think there's anything anyone could have said to you that would have made a difference in the choices you made, at the very beginning, before you even decided to be a social worker? Weren't you kind of interested in science and math and things?
Well, yeah, I was a science major. I think the difference was not what somebody said to me, but the job offer I got, because when I came back from Appalachia, I decided to use my science, and I actually was looking at jobs working in labs, and actually I was applying for a job at Cutter's over at Cutter's lab over at Emeryville, and that's when Dick offered me a job as girls worker at Cameron House. I think if that hadn't happened, my life course might have been very different. So it's not so much what somebody said as circumstances. Yeah, because I wouldn't have even thought of working at Cameron House, so, or working in any type of social service agency, kind of.
There's a higher power there at work, and
yeah, it's what a pastor friend, Dave Ing, said. Some people call this circumstances. I call it God, and the longer I live, I think that happens. God intervenes.